Have you ever wondered how a car really moves? If you think about it, the only elements of the car which are in contact with the ground are the tires. What is really happening between the tire and the ground which is helping the car to move? This is a question that I am trying to understand in this video. Hello, I am Aravind. Welcome to my channel. I am driven by the curiosity to learn. Here, I try to share them with you. Let's start by understanding the various motions associated with a car. As a passenger sitting inside the car, what kind of motion do you experience? You are moving in a direction, that means you are translating. However, can you say the same about the wheels? They are not just moving ahead, but at the same time rotating too. That means they are rolling. Rolling motion is a combination of both translation as well as rotation. Hence, it is imperative to understand both of them first before we dive deeper into rolling motion. A kinematic analysis of rolling motion is necessary for us to really derive what actually moves the vehicle forward. When there involves motion only in one direction, we call it as translatory motion. Let's consider a rigid wheel with its center of mass moving with a linear velocity vcm. If it is in pure translatory motion, all points on the wheel should have the same linear velocity as vcm. What that means is, be it a point on the circumference or the wheel rim or the points on the spoke, all of them will have the same linear velocity as the center of the wheel. In rotational motion, the points on the wheel, they don't move in a particular direction. In fact, they are continuously changing direction. However, the angular displacement, or the rate at which the angular displacement changes, which is the angular velocity, it remains same for all the points on the wheel. While rotating, they are always accompanied by an instantaneous linear velocity, and it is directly proportional to the distance of the point from the axis of rotation. That means the points on the circumference will have the highest instantaneous linear velocity, which is given by v is equal to r omega, where r is nothing but the radius of the wheel. Having understood the translatory motion and rotational motion from a kinematic point of view, now let's look at rolling motion. Let's consider a rolling wheel with its center translating at a linear velocity vcm, while the wheel rolls with an angular velocity omega. What do you think the velocity of each point on the wheel would be? As you know, rolling motion is a combination of both rotation and translation. That is, it is moving as well as rotating. Hence, the velocity of each point on the wheel would be the vectorial sum of both the translatory velocity component as well as the linear velocity due to rotation. Is there a relationship between the translatory velocity and the linear velocity due to rotation? Let's try to understand this with a demonstration. Let's consider the wheel with radius r, so its circumference is 2 pi r. Let's consider the point P, which is in contact with the ground at time t is equal to 0, and the wheel starts rolling. Let's suppose that the wheel makes one complete rotation, that is, the point P will turn by 360 and again comes into contact with the ground. What is the distance traveled by the center of the wheel? It is equal to the circumference of the wheel. That is, the distance is directly proportional to the angular displacement, or S is equal to r theta. If you differentiate it, you get the relationship that V is equal to r omega. So this is the equation of rolling compliance, wherein for the rolling to be called pure rolling, that is without any spinning or skidding, it has to always maintain the relationship that its translatory velocity should be always equal to the linear velocity due to rotation. And only in that case it can roll purely. So for pure rolling to happen, the compliance equation V is equal to R omega should always be maintained. But do you think would that be the case all the time? Will the translational velocity be always equal to the rotational velocity? No, that's certainly not the case all the time. So there will be differences between the translational velocity and the rotational velocity. And how it will affect the rolling motion? The difference between the rotational and translational velocities, we need to quantify them. For that, we introduce a factor called slip. Slip can be defined in multiple ways as a ratio or in percentage terms. Let's go by the percentage definition here. Let's look at the first case wherein the translational velocity is greater than the rotational velocity, resulting in a positive slip. We would have encountered this situation. Suppose you are driving a car at certain speed on a highway and you suddenly brake on a loose gravel and you feel the tires skidding and the vehicle is not slowing down. This is the situation that we are talking about. Let's visualize it with two different slip percentages as shown in the plots. The first with the 25% and the second one with the 75%. You can clearly understand from the graphic the difference in the amount of rotation for the same distance for a higher slip. Similar to that, look at the relative velocity of contact point. Similar, as slip increases, the relative velocity of the contact point also increases. In this case, it is in the same direction of motion. Let us look at the second case now, wherein the rotational velocity is greater than the translational velocity, resulting in a negative slip. We could relate to this situation as well. Consider launching the vehicle hard. You could feel the tires spinning rather than accelerating the vehicle as quickly as possible. Again, we can see the visualization with similar slip percentage 25 and 75%. Now, not the negative sign of the slip here, indicating that the translational velocity is lesser than the rotational velocity. And look at the relative velocity of contact point. It is acting in the direction opposite to the motion. What we need to conclude from here? So under pure rolling, the compliance between the rotational velocity and translational velocity by means of V is equal to R omega should always be maintained. In that case, very important note that the velocity of the contact point under pure rolling will always be zero. However, whenever there is a deviation either to the positive side or negative side, the contact point gains a relative velocity with respect to the ground. This has direct correlation in defining how the vehicles can move and stop. When there is a relative motion between two bodies which are in contact, what's the force that develops? I think you guessed it right, it's the frictional force. So when the wheel and the tire of the car wants to rotate faster, the portion of the rubber which is in contact with the ground still wants to move backward, or in other words, it has a relative velocity in the opposite direction of travel. Thus, a frictional force develops acting in the direction of travel, propelling the vehicle forward. This is a tractive force which accelerates the vehicle forward. Similarly, when the wheel and the tire of the car wants to rotate slower, the rubber which is in contact with the ground still wants to go ahead. In other words, it still has a relative velocity in the direction of travel. There, the frictional force or the traction is opposing the vehicle, slowing it down. The mechanism by which the rubber tire generates friction is a fascinating topic. Unfortunately, it is not in the scope of this video. However, I would like to touch upon the basics of friction. As discussed, the frictional force opposes the relative motion of two bodies which are in contact. So, it depends primarily on the force which is keeping the bodies in contact. It's called the normal force and it is compressive in nature. Secondly, frictional force also depends on the nature of material of the bodies which are in contact. But most importantly, in the case of rubber tires, frictional force is also dependent on the slip. That is, it changes with slip. So it's clear that the traction forces move the vehicle. To enhance our perspective, let's consider the dynamics of wheel in two scenarios. Firstly, the acceleration and secondly, the deceleration. Let's first understand the initial conditions of the simulation. Assume that the wheel and the tire of the car is having a certain initial translational velocity and it is under the condition of pure rolling. That means the contact point of the rubber tire with the ground has at present no relative velocity, hence no slip. But at time t is equal to 1 second, the engine delivers torque at the wheel, causing it to spin faster, thereby causing it to slip. You can observe the rise in slip as well as in relative velocity. In response to the slip, traction forces generates which accelerates the vehicle forward. Observe how the translational velocity represented by the vector colored in green increases as a response to the traction force. Now let's consider the dynamics of the wheel when it is decelerating. In this case, initially the vehicle is having significant amount of translational velocity and it is under the condition of pure rolling. As soon as brake is applied at time t is equal to 1 second, it starts slipping. As a response, braking traction develops, decelerating the vehicle down. Observe the change in the translational velocity vector due to deceleration. Let's conclude how the traction forces really move the vehicle by looking at two final simulations. This time, I would like the simulations to give you a broader perspective from the vehicle level. Consider a front-wheel drive sedan with more weight on its front tires. As the engine delivers torque to the front wheel, the traction force develops and accelerates the vehicle forward. When the brake is applied to the rotating wheels of a moving car, braking traction develops as a consequence and decelerates the vehicle. We discussed the motion of a car in longitudinal direction and how traction forces help to decelerate or accelerate the car. But we did not discuss how the cars are able to take a turn or how are we able to steer them. That's something for the future. If you found this video resourceful, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks everyone for watching.